Hi, so tonight I'm honored to have our distinguished guest, Hollie Choi, with us. She's formerly was with Fox Entertainment, and while she was there, she was the owner of the cornerstone of intellectual property management platform that they used. She led the digital transformation to Salesforce and to Amazon Web Services. When Fox was sold to Disney last year, she designed a framework and developed the roadmap on how the company would merge its intellectual property platforms. She's also a founding member of Women at Fox and at 21st Century Fox's Women in Technology. She's also served as a board of directors at the foundation of Pierce College and supports a variety of partnerships and alliances within the community. I'd like to welcome our guest this evening, Hollie Choi, to the stage. Are you
Sure.
there?
I
You should
am.
show up. Great,
I
there you go. I'm going to go ahead and pin you so everyone can see you. We won't lose you. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. So I'll go ahead and jump in and we'll start moving along. And then, like Rick said, if you have any questions, you can post them in the Q&A. And Rick is paying attention to those while I'm talking. So don't be concerned that you're going to interrupt me because he's got it all covered. So thank you for joining us. We're going to talk about overcoming adversity and creativity and managing product change today. There's obviously, everybody's aware of the massive global disruption that we're all experiencing. And so I wanted to give some ideas of how you might be able to deal with that in your individual positions where you're working. And so hopefully we'll be able to give you some ideas for how to move forward and hopefully make you feel a little bit more at ease about the what feels like overwhelming change. So first thing I wanted to do is welcome everybody. Thank you again for coming. I'll go ahead and as I'm doing this, I think Rick is going to ask you all a question. So if you're going to be prompted on your screen to answer a poll for me, just so that I get an idea of kind of who you are. So you kind of know who I am. I've spent the last 15 years leading software development organizations in the media and entertainment space. I have experience before that, but I'm not going to age myself. So I'm just going to talk about that 15 years. Most recently, I've worked in intellectual property and master data management. So that has been really over the last 4 years or so. Before that, I came from digital asset management. And in that time, I've also spent time working with international theatrical post-production, digital screeners team, and the studio lot operations. So those are all really interesting. I will say though that I feel like the studio lot operations was the more, that was probably the most fun I've ever had at work. So Rick, do we have the poll ready?
Sure. Pulse.
So I wanted to get an idea who you are a little bit. So if everybody can, you probably just got prompted to answer a quick question. And the question really is, where are you in your career? Are you an analyst or a project manager? Are you a developer, dev lead? Are you a manager or executive? Or are you something else? Anything else? So we'll wait a couple of seconds for the results.
I'm just waiting for the last couple of votes to come in and then we'll show the results.
Awesome.
We're getting close. I want to appreciate the audience for participating. We've got almost 100% participation here. Everyone's finding their controls, using the technology.
It is a test. We're making sure everyone's paying attention.
There you go. Yeah. You know, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close the poll. And would you like me to share the results or not?
Sure. Let me.
Okay, here we go. Ooh, it's cute. Here we go. Split.
Great. Okay, so it looks like about 39% are analyst project manager, 11% developer or dev lead, about 36% manager and executive, and 14% said none of these is you. So that gives me a good idea sort of who I'm speaking to and making sure that I'm messaging it properly. So thank you for joining again. I really appreciate you being here. Okay, let's just dive in then. So I wanted to point out that when there is a massive change like this, it actually may feel like a storm, right? It really feels like companies are just buckling down and reducing spending, just trying to keep the lights on. And what really is interesting about when these kinds of things happen is that there's really an unprecedented opportunity to improve the way you work and change things, right? So let's talk a little bit about that word, disruption. So this is sort of a newish buzzword. People are sort of talking about disruption like it's new, but it's really not all that new. And while the global pandemic that we're all living under right now is probably the largest global event any of us will ever experience, we've all lived through a disruption that was pretty massive, and it kind of happened in a really short amount of time. So let's look at that example. So what I'm talking about specifically is in the year 2008. And I don't know if you remember where you were, but once I start naming off some of these things, I think it'll become really clear what I'm talking about. So we started the year 2008 in a recession, and that was going to stick with us for a whole nother year after 2008 was over. There was a war in Afghanistan and a war in Iraq. California legalized same-sex marriage. There was a massive recall of beef in this country. There were earthquakes, and there was one in Illinois, weirdly. It was a record year for tornadoes. Major hurricanes were ripping through the southeast of the United States and causing havoc there. There were multiple international incidents, multiple mass shootings. A bomb went off in Times Square. The Pope visited Ground Zero. Unemployment suddenly surged to 7.3%, which was the highest it had ever been since the 90s. And the stock market in one day fell 3%, which is huge, which caused the Dow Jones Industrial Average to drop 370 points in a single day. Then, in technology, SpaceX launched the Falcon, and it orbited the Earth, which was the first private spaceflight ever. NASA did 3 flybys of Mercury and landed an unmanned probe on Mars. Bill Gates stepped down as the chairman of Microsoft that year. The US government took over Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. Delta Airlines merged with Northwest Airlines. The government then started trying to fend off the global crisis that was coming, and they issued 2 stimulus packages. Some of us got a check in the mail from the federal government, which sounds very familiar to some things that have been going on lately. And then the Fed jumped in and cut the rates to try and make sure that they were staving off another deeper recession. And then the Dow Jones dropped 680 points in a single day, which was a record. And it launched us into a global economic crisis. Did I mention the Olympics happened in 2008 in Beijing? And then this very important election of Barack Obama as president of the United States. So a lot happened to us as a country and as a world in 2008 that was very disruptive to the way that we work and just to how companies function. So let's talk about what was going on in the media that year, because we had our own set of issues. Every one of those things was a media-worthy event. But on top of that, the media and entertainment industry started the year with a screenwriter's strike, and there was no television production happening at all during those months. What made it more interesting was that this was also an anniversary year for the Grammys and the Academy Awards and the Emmys. So in February, once the strike had lifted, the Grammys were held. This was a little late for them. The Academy Awards came shortly after, and if you know anything about anniversary shows, they are bigger and better than any other show we've ever done. And then in June, Universal Studios experienced a fire that destroyed part of their vault, and that is a massive blow for a studio because that's where all of our master tapes are kept. The musical Rent ended a 12-year run on Broadway, and then the 60th annual Primetime Emmys were held. So this is a lot going on in a single year. So it may not be one single issue that's causing the entire world to really recoil and be in upheaval. But there was a lot going on that year, and it was a pretty crazy year. And it had a lot of financial impacts to not just us, but to, not just the media and entertainment industry, but to the world at large. So I do have a fun thing, again, to try and make sure that you are paying attention, because that was a lot of information that I just threw at you. So Rick, we're ready for the next poll. Oh, very good. Okay, so this is movie trivia. So which film won the Academy Award at this award show that I'm talking about here in 2008 for Best Picture? Your options are Slumdog Millionaire. Don't cheat, guys. Don't Google it. No cheating. Slumdog Millionaire, No Country for Old Men, Juno, or Little Miss Sunshine?
Yeah, we have the votes coming in. We're approaching, yeah. They're a little slow to start. I think they hesitated a little bit. Think about
Somebody
this
was
question.
cheating.
You puzzled them. Oh, maybe. I thought it was just stretching their.
They got uncomfortable. I was talking about all this disruption.
There's just a couple of votes remaining here. We'll give it the full minute.
Okay.
All right, everyone. Here we go.
Okay, so the actual winner in this year, so this is a confusing one, so because both of them are here. So the winner for 2008 was Slumdog Millionaire, but the winner that was honored in 2008 was actually No Country for Old Men. So it's a little of a trick question, but looks like about 4 of you picked No Country for Old Men, 17 picked Slumdog Millionaire, and then Juno and Little Miss Sunshine were nominated in their years, but neither of them won the Academy Award. All right. Okay, no more fun. Let's go back to work. So speaking of which, when you go back to work, what can you expect? And so what did we do when 2008 was on fire the way that it was? And these are some of the things that we did as a company and as a group to try and really make sure that we were in a good position to keep moving forward and to keep producing entertainment for the masses. So first and foremost was reduce costs. This is, I think, the first thing that any company is going to do and is doing right now. I think you've seen some of the things that are going on with this, reducing staff, reducing spending, and everybody has switched to keeping the lights on mode, right? So what do we have to do to just keep the lights on? Not doing anything extra right now. So this is sort of where I think we are mostly now. So the next step, if you haven't already done this, is you start to reassess your priorities. So you look at everything that is already in flight and decide which of these things do we need to really do and which things can we maybe plan to delay, and if they're a little less critical, let's put them off. So basically what you're looking at is what's on fire and what's very adjacent to fire. So those things become your highest priorities, and anything that's a little less critical can wait a minute. It goes on the roadmap for future planning. So then what we did is we evaluated our pipeline, what was coming in. And we just did our near-term plans, and then we looked at our less critical projects, and then we created our new future roadmap. So this is what does our long-term now look like. So you have to really imagine a massive pivot in most companies where anything that was deemed not absolutely on fire or close to it just didn't get done that year, and probably didn't get done the following year. So then other things that you can do, because when you're in keeping the lights on mode, you're not doing as much project work, right? And so you want to be able to add value to your business users and to your customers. So what you do is then you go around and look for efficiencies. Where are we being inefficient, and how can we fix that? The big thing, and I put this last, but it's not really last in terms of priority, it's just another thing not to forget, is that you have to remember that you have a team, and these are people. And you need to have some empathy for the fact that they are nervous, and they're looking for leadership, and they're hoping that they don't get they're not caught up in part of this reduction in staff. And what we did was we just really made sure that we communicated well with our teams and made sure that they understood what we were doing, how we were planning on helping to keep the company in good shape. And then we supported our people. And whenever possible, we offered them extras if it meant going home a little early on a Friday or bringing in lunch because everybody was working very hard on something. We did those kinds of things to try and keep people motivated and encouraged, and knowing that somebody at work cares about you. So what can you do today or in the very near future. Rick, do I have another poll right now, or am I jumping the gun?
Nope, just waiting for you to get ready. Here we go.
Oh, sorry, I do have another poll. So before I start this one, I wanted to ask, what do you see as your biggest challenge that you're facing at work, given the circumstances that we're all facing? And I wanted to kind of get an idea of what is sort of causing you the most nervousness.
Votes are coming in. We're about halfway. Kind of fun to watch them move while people submit their answers.
I don't have the same view as you. I just still see
No, I get to see it live. So. All right, get those last votes in. We're going to cut it off here, you guys. We got 5 minutes left. Or 5 minutes, 5 seconds. No, 5 minutes. That'd be a long
Take your
way.
time, guys. We got all night.
Just missing a couple of votes. Come on, you can do it. The last 10%. Oh, it looks like, just got one in there. Looks like things have quieted down here. So let's see what we've got.
Okay. Oh, excellent. Okay. So it looks like the number one answer was providing value while scaling back. So I have great answers for you on that one. And then it's almost a tie between being a good leader and knowing what to do next. And then financial hardship is 18%. So you said you had one that came in after, Rick?
No, it did not. Just,
Oh, okay. It got counted. Excellent.
yes.
All votes counted. Okay, so that gives me a good idea, kind of what everybody's sort of feeling emotionally about this whole situation. So let me give you an idea of what I think you can do now in order to help yourself, help your company, provide that value, be a good leader, and give your company the best leg up. So first and foremost, I'm going to call this network, but it really doesn't have to do with finding ways to meet up with people or talk to people. It really has to do with building your community. So think of your employment place, your business, as a community. Who are the people that you normally work with all the time, and who are the people that you should be reaching out to that you just haven't ever had the time to do that, or it wasn't a priority, or you were just so heads down busy on those fires that were cropping up before. So as you go into sort of a keeping the lights on mode, start to really build this community. Go around and make time to talk to your colleagues, have Zoom lunch. I had a Zoom lunch with my team today. It was great to see everybody all together at once. Nobody working in the middle of it, right? So it was really nice, and it gave us a moment to just have that personal connection. So another thing that you can do is clean up your tech debt. We all have this, right? And I know there's some developers here. You know what happens. You're being pressured to drop something quickly, make sure that it goes out the door, and you leave kind of a little mess behind. And several of those messes start to add up, right? And so even though your system is functioning just fine, it's really not the best practice, and it wouldn't be the way that you really would want to have done it. So spend some time on this, because if you're in keeping the lights on mode, it's very possible for you to maybe get some of that done as well. So the next thing is get fit. And this is where I'm going to focus some of the what to do next, really in depth in a few slides. Eliminate duplicative work within your organization. So you probably know of something where somebody's doing it in one place and then someone else is doing the exact same thing somewhere else. So as you're building your network, start talking to those people that you know are impacted by that, and start to see where you can add value by eliminating some of that duplication. And then I'm going to say go outside, but I think we all know that I don't literally mean physically go outside because we all know we're not supposed to be doing that right now. But what I mean by this is just borrow ideas from other industries and apply them to yours. I attended a seminar once where a man was talking about how he used to work at British Airways, and he went to the Disneyland Parks group to find out how to line people up at the airport, because they used to have people just sort of swirling about in the lines. And Disney had perfected this way of going, you know, the back and forth Z motion of the lining up. So they went to them and they adopted this. It was from a completely different industry that had nothing to do with airlines, but it works beautifully in the same way, right? So, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. So here's a big idea that you can borrow from me. That's not actually me. Okay, so what I'm talking about here is Toyota and Ford. And the reason why I bring up cars, my dad was a mechanic, and so I have a lot of car references in my head, and this just sort of came up as something that it hit me a while ago, and I've been working on it ever since. But there are these two automakers, right? And before the 80s, Ford was considered like the gold standard. That was the car you drove. Nobody drove anything but an American car. And the reason was because the way that they had their manufacturing was done was considered the gold standard for the world. Well, Toyota looked at this and they thought, that's pretty cool, and we do that, and we want to keep doing that, but where can we take their method and make it better? So they started to study Ford, and they found that Ford was the creator of the moving assembly line. And this cut out a lot of waste, right? Because you didn't have one guy, you know, just plugging things together and building a car by himself, or two or three guys as a team or whatever. So what would happen is that the parts would come to them, they would do the assembly, and then it would move on to the next person who would do their part. Well, what Toyota did was that they created the flexible moving assembly line. So Ford's method, you could only do one type of car in the plant. In Toyota's method, they can actually shift the assembly line within about 15 minutes to be making a completely different car on the same floor with the same people in the same space. So their factories became a lot more efficient. So another thing that they did at Ford, which was considered beautiful and an industry standard, was they standardized the workflow around specialized assemblers. So if I'm the guy who bolts the tires on with the lug nuts, that's my only job. And I do it all day, and I do it well, and I'm the best there is in the whole world. So Toyota said, we like that, we'll do that as well. So one of the things that Ford did that was different was they outsourced all of the manufacturing of their parts. And this is where I want you to really pay attention, because this is where I start to really go into it. So they outsourced this manufacturing of their parts to a lot of different machine shops all over Detroit. And what was happening was, let's say I'm the company that makes the hinges for the doors, and I am at capacity, I can't make anymore, but Ford has a big need for these hinges. So they outsourced to another machine shop that is now producing the same hinges. However, when they're arriving at my factory in Detroit, they're a little bit different, right? Like the hole is, you know, a 1/16 of an inch off. And so what happens is the assembler has to do something to it. So he has to sort of file something down, or, you know, put it on and then sort of beat it into place with a hammer. So it's not really great, because these parts are then in a car that's then going down the road and bouncing around, and sooner or later they start to kind of come undone because they weren't really designed to go together. And even if they were designed to go together, they weren't manufactured properly. So Toyota said, okay, we're going to standardize parts manufacturing. And then they created something that you're probably going to recognize, which is the Kanban system. And what they did was they actually created this. It's not the same as what you know as in software development, but I just want to point out that software development has already taken from the Toyota concept. So what they did is they made these parts standard and available at all times. So if you're an assembler, you just go grab the part you need, and it is always there. So it's sort of like the backlog in our Agile methodology, where there's always another ticket, another story ready to go, right? So the other thing that Ford was doing was that they organized special design teams working on a specific system, right? So if I'm the person who's designing that hinge, I work with probably the guy who does the bolts, right? So That's my design team, is we are just designing those two things together. So what Toyota did was they actually looked at that and went, okay, but what about the rest of the door and the frame that the door goes in? So by doing what they did, they actually took those specialized engineers or designers and they put them together as a team. So the one who designs the hinge is working as a team with the one who designs the bolts, who designs the frames, who designs the door, who designs the window, who designs, back in the day, I know some of you are old, but they used to crank the windows down. So the person who designs the crank and the gears and so the entire door system is a workflow. So rather than having individual specialized designers working in their little silos, everybody came together as a team, and you still have your specialized trade, but this way you're working alongside someone to make the design that then feeds to that standardized manufacturing that then feeds to your flexible moving assembly line. So if you're not quite getting how this pertains to software development, let's keep going. So here's sort of an idea of how today's design process typically works. And it's usually focused around a business unit, right? So here you have, this is going to be sort of what I know about working in the studio, right? So I worked in intellectual property management, but this could be any kind of property management. So there's an ID and there's some inventory, and you do governance and taxonomy around the metadata and all of that good stuff. But then you have legal systems and sales systems and marketing and finance and resale systems. You have some other method of distribution, and you have operations that's sort of overseeing a lot of these things. And then what happens is, because each of these groups is specialized to their business unit, you end up with a lot of controlled vocabulary that really is common across all of these, but the way that it's stored and the way that it's designed is not always the same, right? So I'll give an example of country codes. So we have countries that we do business in, and they're the same countries that everyone here is doing business in. But in the legal system, the country code is a 2-digit code, and in the finance and accounting system, it's a 4-digit code, right? So then these two cannot just talk to each other if we need to integrate those two systems. So we have this integration layer that then does those translations. So what's wrong with that exactly? I mean, that's the way we all do it. So what's the issue, Holly, right? So what? Well, some of this will actually lead to offline methods. So it inadvertently promotes the use of manual processes going on that are outside of the system. It can also create a lack of cooperation between teams, whether it's within the business or within IT or both, because I'm in the marketing team and marketing is not sales and sales is not marketing. And even though we have some overlap, we don't do the same things. And so we don't really want to work together because they want to do it their way and I want to do it my way. So there's some lack of cooperation that gets created, which then leads to duplication of effort. So someone's typing in country code in one system and they have to retype it in the other because it doesn't talk to each other. Your data is inconsistent. So you have these data, anytime you duplicate entry something, there's a potential for inconsistency and human error. And then there's a cost of time to do that duplicate entry, but also we spend an awful lot of time integrating systems together because we do things like this, because we have this inconsistent data structure. So let's take a look at this again, right? So here's today's design process. And when I looked at this and I sort of applied that Toyota mind to it, what I saw here was my specialized teams. And down here at the bottom, my integrations are really the assemblers that are shaving off the parts. But then if you start looking through here, you start to see these workflows emerge, right? And some of these, and this is not comprehensive by any stretch because it would have just been like completely crazy. But you get an idea that some stuff actually touches everything. And then you have a few that touch really big swaths of your organization. And there are workflows here. So what I'm recommending is a couple of things. So first is we change our design process a little bit. And what we do is we define that collective control vocabulary that happens across all of these systems. So if it's country codes, if it's inventory part numbers, or whatever it is in your organization, and you establish a standard for how that controlled vocabulary is stored, and then it's accessible within the enterprise. So when I'm building a system, I pipe in, grab the controlled vocabulary. It's the only thing that appears in the drop-down for the users. So then when I'm ready to integrate with another system, we're all speaking the same language. So this cuts your integration time down. The next thing I'm recommending is that you create cross-functional analyst teams. So when you go back to this previous slide and you see all of these specialized teams, you're picking your people from within these organizations. So if everybody can see my pointer, if I'm doing something in this workflow, I want an analyst from this line of business and this line of business on a team together so that they are analyzing those workflows and examining them for any opportunity to make it better. Next, workflow teams make recommendations for system improvements or for process improvements. A lot of times it's just the business not working effectively. Sometimes it's the business not working effectively because the system doesn't support that. And then comes the hard part, including your business representatives in those workflow teams. Because like I said, sometimes there's some headbutting between these groups. And so getting them to understand why, when you do X, it affects Y on this other team, and getting them to understand why why we want to go to these more defined and controlled vocabularies and better workflows. So at this point, what we're saying is you're collaborating around a workflow instead of just your business unit alone as an IT professional. So it's sort of the Toyota method, right? Standardize the parts that are common to everyone, make it available, and then collaborate around the workflow, design around the workflow, and build around the workflow. So what kind of benefits can you expect from this? You can see that you would have lots of benefits in the fact that workflow teams are going to continuously identify opportunities for improvement in the business process. They're also going to make other recommendations that you can't even imagine the stuff that comes out when you start to really look at the workflow. Like you'll find that there are systems in between things that don't belong there, where you could do one integration instead of 2 or 3 or more. You also have people that are part of a process that they're adding no value, and there's really no reason for them to be there. And maybe they want to be informed, so you just find a way to make sure that they're getting valid reporting. So moving to the right, holistic solutions create business continuity. So if everybody's working from the same sheet of music, you're going to have a much more continuous workflow between your businesses. Aligning on a single controlled vocabulary is going to significantly decrease the cost of integrations. And I think if you ask IT professionals, you'll see lots of folks will say, I spend probably a huge chunk of time integrating with other systems because when I build this system, we're not all speaking the same language. And it's not going to eliminate all integration work, but it will significantly reduce some of that transformational work that you have to do in order to get the data models in alignment. The other piece is that you get cross-functional business and technology teams developing a community now. So people are starting to collaborate better when you do this. So this is what my proposed design process looks like here, right? So we're going to start by, oh, sorry about that, I jumped ahead. We're going to start by defining our requirements and identifying workflows. So this looks very much like the way that you pretty well work now, but what we're doing is we're doing it with business and technology workflows that are a team, workflow teams, and then around a common controlled vocabulary. And then we all know that we should be using common tools and methodologies, but that's also not always the case in large companies. So that's a whole other presentation all by itself. So defining your requirements, identify your workflows, identify your business teams, investigate what are your current state workflows, optimize those workflows, and start all over. So that is what I have for you guys tonight. I wanted to thank you for joining. I hope you found some good ideas that you can take back and make valuable changes in your organization, or at least just be a leader for change. And hopefully that makes you feel a little less nervous about the global climate that we're all in.
I felt Jonas had written that presentation for me. I happen to be a car fanatic and a database engineer, so I can relate to all your content. You're speaking directly to me, so I appreciate that.
Excellent.
Your master data management, all the problems, yeah, you deal with in the office, you touched on. Thank you. We do have one question out here, kind of a personal question of your experience at the.
Yeah, okay, I'll read it for everybody. So the question is, why was the studio lot the most fun? I would say when I first started at Fox, that was my first job. So my job was to maintain, manage all of the smaller systems on the back lot. And so I got to spend about 90% of the time outdoors, which is unusual for an IT person. And I sort of just trekked around the lot, building relationships, getting people to trust me, to believe that I was there to help them, fix their problems, bring them new equipment. So I was sort of the hero at that point. I feel like it made me sort of the mayor of the lot. Like whenever I would be out on the studio lot, it would be really hard for me to come across somebody that didn't know me. So it was a lot of fun to just really get to know how the studio operates and making sure that they all had what they needed. Thank you for that question. That was great. Okay. Oh, we have more questions coming in. So let's see. We have one. How do you recommend bringing about methodology consistency between business and IT? This is a major effort at my company I worked at, and it took years. It may take years. It's an excellent question. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's tough, right? It requires a lot of patience, and it requires really, I would say the first step is getting executive leadership to buy into the idea, right? And starting to get alignment across groups. Once you have really the ability, if you can prove it out in something really important, or even something kind of small, even to start with, it's really proof of concept. If you can show, hey, we saved this much money by having these groups collaborate on this thing, or, you know, we put these two groups in a room together and, you know, fought it out until we figured out the way to do it more effectively, more efficiently. It's sort of the same thing that anytime you introduce a new technology or a new method, it's a lot of roadshow and PR. So that's why I recommend that now might be a good time to start really having those conversations, because I think people are open to making changes. And then also because a lot of folks, when you're in keeping the lights on mode, you're looking for stuff to do in some cases. So you might be able to get some good fans of your methodology and your process. Let's see. Next question was, who is the best team to negotiate alignment? The executive governance team. You know, it really, I would have to say, it really does need to come from the executive level, but also the middle management layer. So directors and managers, senior managers. It really helps if those folks are all in alignment with the executives and really marching to the same beat, right? Because if you have one group that's just refusing to go along, it gets a lot tougher. So I've always noticed that if I have executive leadership behind my ideas and really pushing for them, that usually helps to make sure that adoption happens, right? It's really at the executive level and then the next level down. Let me know, Kim, if I didn't answer your question completely. I think that's what you were asking, but you can let me know. Let's see. Next question, what is the biggest challenge to implement what you discussed? Having the patience to work with these groups, right? Sometimes folks are really, really stuck in the idea of, I like the way I do it, this is the way we've always done it, or I do it that way on purpose. So there's always a reason they're doing it, right? And so really getting to the bottom of what is the reason so that you understand it. Really just starting with why do they do it that way? And just if you can understand where they're coming from, it's going to be a lot easier to negotiate. Let's see. Do you recommend establishing a business PMO and an IT PMO by project? I think it's good to make sure that you have a PMO in both spaces. I don't know if it's necessary to have them per project if you have an overarching one. It's never a bad thing to have some governance, but if you get too in the weeds with it, it can actually become an impediment. So I think it's important to have standards and have everybody on the same page that this is how we operate, because it is a lot easier to get things done if everybody's doing it the same way. But I would say I would take it up a level from there. Okay, let's see. Next question, who should hire the people, the project manager, workflow manager, or the technical department, who then sends their people to the project? Also, who do people report to? Okay, there's several questions, so let's start. I'll try and break this out. So who should hire the people, the project manager, workflow manager, or technical department, who then sends their people to the project? It depends on your organizational structure, how this really gets answered, right? So if you're in a very matrixed organization, there should be multiple folks weighing in, right? So if you have a product team and you have a development or engineering team, you should get buy-in from both on any new hires that are going to be really, really key players in the project. I would say I would definitely have both. I would expect both, right? Because it's also, I have a whole methodology around how I hire people. So again, it's a whole nother slideshow, but really making sure that somebody's going to fit in with the organization and be able to adopt something like that, where if you're going to be changing your strategy and it's not what people are used to, there's going to be some difficulty with some people accepting it. So it's good to know upfront from all aspects whether or not somebody's a good fit that way. And I think the best way to do that is to really get lots of, or not lots of, but a couple of opinions on that. And then the question, who do people report to? It's a great question. They still report to their same managers, right? You would keep everybody organizationally structured the same way, but as you're developing, you become sort of these sub-teams of your team. So your management reporting structure shouldn't really change, but as the groups are working together to develop a new workflow or a new system around the new workflow, I would say that it really does take a lot of the leaders being able to get along, right? Because whenever you are in a matrix sort of organization, and this is kind of like that, you do have a lot of cooks in the kitchen and it can get pretty hairy, but it's really important if they all understand their role and being able to do and perform their role. Okay. Next question. Any tips for dealing with egos or turf wars? Oh, good question. So for egos, I would say everybody has one, right? So it's just a question of really what is driving that. I always try to look at somebody's, when somebody's giving me, kind of I'm going to use attitude for lack of a better term. But if you have somebody who is difficult to work with, right? Because they're rubbing you the wrong way, or they're being unhelpful, or they want it their way and they don't care about what anyone else says. I would say I usually try to figure out what's causing that, and a lot of times I find that it's because they feel like they haven't been heard in the past, or they feel like they're not being heard at that moment. People don't get this way just out of nowhere. Something happened. So I try to give them a little bit of extra attention to try and understand exactly what is driving that. And with the idea of turf wars, this is a little scary because it really sort of makes me think that the leaders should be involved, and there should be escalation of any kind of, somebody's just not cooperating, but in a way where it's actually creating problems as opposed to just making things a little tougher. So I would say get leadership involved and try to work through it that way. Okay.
Wonderful. Looks like we've covered our questions. You've done a great job fielding them for us. I want to thank the audience for participating, sending in their questions. This is pretty exciting. This is our first virtual event. I like the fact that we didn't have to fight traffic, didn't have to pay for parking. And what's even nice about it is we don't have to be geographically close to each other anymore. We can actually invite people from another state, or anyone can attend. So that opens up the opportunity for people to interact with one another. So I think this may be something beneficial going forward, even when we're not at stay-at-home orders going forward. So
absolutely. So yeah, I think for me, just to kind of wrap up, I just wanted to let everybody know, I know Rick is working on a recording of the presentation, and I am on LinkedIn, and I'm kind of a LinkedIn nerd, so you can find me there. And if you want to just shoot me a message saying you attended and we're not already connected, let's go ahead and get connected. You can contact me that way, or my email address is at the beginning of the presentation. So if you had questions for me, or you just wanted to geek out about software development, let me know.
all right. Oh, wait, some more questions. I guess we're not actually done. Let's see.
It looks like comments.
Here? Oh, can't wait.
So can't wait for the sequel. Thank you. And,
okay, all right. So that looks good.
Online events are awesome. That was the gist of the other comment. So, well, thank you again, everyone. I appreciate it. And I know I appreciate being asked. Thanks to AITP for inviting me.
So see that in the chat window. I appreciate everyone's attendance tonight. Like I said, this was exciting to have our first virtual meeting. Thank you for attending and making it a success. We'll be having a meeting. We're planning our next AITP meeting. I believe is tentatively scheduled for June 11th, if I recall correctly. We're going to talk about security and have a panel of chief security officers to share with us their insight. So you can stay tuned for that.